On Tuesday, June 4th, Major League Baseball banned Tucupita Marcano of the San Diego Padres for life. This shocking announcement came just a day after the news that Marcano, plus 4 minor leaguers, were being investigated for gambling on baseball. According to MLB, Marcano bet over $150,000 on baseball between 2022 and 2023, when he was a member of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Of his 231 MLB-related bets, 25 of them included Pirates games. MLB also said that Marcano won just 4.3% of his bets, which didn't affect their decision, but is still pretty embarrassing. This makes Tucupita Marcano the first active player in 100 years to be banned for gambling, placing him on the list of people who have been slapped with the harshest punishment baseball has to offer. Which got me thinking, besides Marcano, how many people are there exactly who have been banned from Major League Baseball for life? So I got to work, trying to find out everything I could about the history of MLB rule breaking, and what I discovered may surprise you. This is the blacklist. Before we can talk about the people on the blacklist, though, we need to understand what the blacklist is. And before we can do that, I need to remind you to like and subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one. Put simply, the blacklist is the unofficial name for a group of players who have been permanently banned from Major League Baseball. Before the 1920s, this was often handled by the teams themselves, like when George Bechtel was kicked off of the Louisville Grays for fixing games, that is, losing on purpose in exchange for money. This was in 1876, making Bechtel the first National League player, and therefore the first MLB player ever, to be banned for life. Scandals like this were not unusual during the dead ball era. Prior to 1920, it was relatively common to see people banned from the sport for any number of reasons. These could range from game fixing, to drunkenness, to abusing umpires. So then, what changed in 1920? To answer this question, we have to look at the year before that, when MLB was hit with the worst scandal the sport had seen since, well, ever. If you don't know what I'm talking about, or if it's been a while since you watched 8 Men Out, here's what happened. In the year 1919, there was no better team in the American League than the Chicago White Sox. Boasting players like Eddie Cicotte, Chick Gandil, and outfielder Shoeless Joe Jackson, Chicago cruised to an 88-52 record, earning them a spot in the World Series versus the Cincinnati Reds. Fans across the country were tuned into the best-of-9 series, excitedly awaiting the results of each game via radio and the paper. The Sox, on the other hand, weren't so happy. The most commonly told story is that the Chicago owner, a man named Charles Comiskey, was notorious for underpaying his team. As a result, players like Gandil and Cicotte conspired with professional gamblers to rig the series, in exchange for the cash they felt they deserved. The real story, though, isn't so simple. Based on this 2012 article, which analyzed contract cards provided by the Hall of Fame, the 1919 White Sox actually had the 3rd highest opening day payroll in the American League, including 5 of the 20 highest earning players. Cicotte himself was the 2nd best paid pitcher in the game, trailing only baseball legend Walter Johnson. So while there may have been other reasons to hate Charles Comiskey, and I'm sure there were plenty, I mean, look at the guy, they weren't exactly underpaid. Whatever the justification was, word quickly spread among gamblers that several White Sox players were throwing the series. And while the general public had yet to catch on, it was obvious that something was wrong. In the opening at-bat of the series, Cicotte nailed the leadoff hitter directly in the back, a signal that the fix was on. He went on to lose his first 2 starts, with the help of several suspicious errors and poor offense from his teammates. Number 2 starter Lefty Williams was even worse, losing all 3 games he pitched, to this day a World Series record. By the time it was over, Chicago had lost in stunning fashion, 5 games to 3. Most of the players involved took home $5,000 each, worth about $90K today, while Gandil raked in $35,000, now equivalent to over $500,000. By the time the 1920 season rolled around, rumors surrounding the series had grown so loud that they could no longer be ignored. That October, a grand jury indicted 8 players, Cicotte, Gandil, and Williams, plus shortstop Swede Risberg, center fielder Happy Felsch, infielder Fred McMullen, third baseman Buck Weaver, and shoeless Joe Jackson. Now, the inclusion of those last 2 was, and still is, somewhat controversial. Weaver, for his part, said that while he was present at the meetings, he never accepted money. Jackson, meanwhile, was said to have been forced into the scheme by his teammates. Looking at their stats from the series, there is an argument that neither of the 2 intentionally helped throw games. Regardless of these claims though, they were both still considered part of the conspiracy. Following a month-long trial in the summer of 1921, all 8 players were found not guilty in a court of law. Of course, that didn't mean things just went back to normal. See, the previous fall, MLB had hired a judge by the name of Kenesaw Mountain Landis to help fix their public image. The original plan was to have Landis lead a 3-member team which would rule on official baseball matters. Landis, however, had other ideas. The judge made it clear that if he was going to accept the position, they would have to give him virtually unchecked control over the game. In other words, if they wanted him for the job, that job would be, essentially, dictator of baseball. This was an extreme demand, but the owners were desperate. They granted Landis his wish, and the office of the commissioner was born. It didn't take long for him to get to work, either. Almost immediately after taking office, Landis placed all 8 accused White Sox on a newly created ineligible list. They would never play in the majors again. Even after the players were acquitted in court, Landis remained firm in his decision. Quote, "No player who throws a ball game, no player who undertakes or promises to throw a ball game, no player who sits in confidence with a bunch of crooked ball players and gamblers, where the ways and means of throwing a game are discussed and does not promptly tell his club about it, will ever play professional baseball." Now, the Black Sox weren't the only ones banned during the reign of Kenesaw Mountain Landis. Far from it, actually. From 1920 to 1944, the year Landis died, he banished a total of 19 people from Major League Baseball, more than every other commissioner combined. Among those 19 was Joe Gedeon, second baseman for the St. Louis Browns. Gedeon happened to be friends with one of the gamblers behind the 1919 series, and was promptly banned for it. Also banned was Phillies infielder Gene Paulette for receiving gifts from gamblers. The same can be said for Lee McGee of the Cubs, who had been released prior to the 1920 season. When McGee took his former team to court for his $9,500 salary, it was discovered that he too had bet on games over the years, earning him a lifetime ban. He also lost the lawsuit, if you were wondering. Shufflin' Phil Douglas of the Giants was banned in 1922 after getting into a fight with manager John McGraw during the season. Angry and drunk, Shufflin' Phil wrote a letter to a fellow player explaining that he planned to leave the team in the middle of the pennant race to spite McGraw. "I don't want this guy to win the pennant," Douglas wrote. "If you want to send a man over here with the goods, I will leave for home on the next train. I will go down to fishing camp and stay there." When Landis found out, he banned Douglas without a second thought. Shufflin' Phil died in 1952, having done what I can only assume was a lot of fishing. In 1924, Giants player Jimmy O'Connell and Giants coach Cozy Dolan were caught and banned for trying to bribe opposing shortstop Heine Sand. Like I said before, Kenesaw Mountain Landis was responsible for the vast majority of bans in MLB history. His final one came in 1943, a year before his death, when he banned Phillies owner William Cox for betting on his team. After Landis died, however, it would be a long time before anybody was blacklisted for Major League Baseball. This was mostly thanks to the fact that gambling among players, the sin for which most were excommunicated, had widely decreased since the early days of the game. That doesn't mean it was gone for good, however. The next guy on this list needs no introduction. In fact, I'm not even sure he deserves one. But here it is anyway. Pete Rose is a lot of things. He's the all-time MLB leader in hits, games played, and at-bats. He played for 24 years as a member of the Reds, the Phillies, and the Expos. He is also, for all intents and purposes, a bastard. Look, I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds on this one. There are already a ton of articles, videos, and even a made-for-TV movie documenting the life, career, and crimes of Peter Edward Rose. But here's a quick rundown. For nearly 2.5 decades, Pete Rose was one of the most famous baseball players in the league. He won 2 World Series in Cincinnati and another in Philadelphia, before returning to Cincinnati in 1984 to become the last player-manager in MLB history. If you're curious why he was the last, here's the reason. In early 1989, Rose, who by this point had retired as a player, was brought in for questioning by then-Commissioner Uberoth. At the time, Rose admitted to gambling on football, basketball, and horse racing, but firmly denied betting on Major League Baseball, which again, and say it with me here, is not allowed. At the time, it had already been decided that Uberoth, who was retiring, would be replaced by a man named Bart Giamatti. Prior to his time as commissioner, Giamatti had been a college professor, a published author, and the president of Yale University. He was also Paul Giamatti's dad, which I personally consider to be his greatest achievement. 3 days after Giamatti took over, he hired a lawyer named John Dowd to investigate Rose. Over a 2-month span, Dowd interviewed bet runners, bookmakers, and other shady associates of Pete's. Then, in June of '89, he released his findings to the world. The Dowd Report, as it was called, was 225 pages long and accompanied by 7 volumes of exhibits. Among these were bank records, telephone calls, betting slips, and interview transcripts, all of which proving that, yes, Rose had in fact bet on baseball as manager of the Reds. On August 24, 1989, MLB and Rose reached an agreement. The league said that they would make no formal finding regarding the gambling allegations. In exchange, Pete Rose was put on the permanently ineligible list. Although Rose was technically allowed to apply for reinstatement after a year, Giamatti was clear that there was no deal in place for that to happen.
Do I have an open mind with regard to Rule 15C? Yes. Is there a deal, a secret number? No. Is there anything automatic? Absolutely not. Will it happen? We will have to wait and see.
Since his banishment, Pete Rose has applied for reinstatement 5 times. The first was in 1992, when Fay Vincent was commissioner. That application was ignored. The second time was in 1998, when Bud Selig was in charge. Selig also did nothing. By that point, the Hall of Fame had made it so anybody on the permanently ineligible list could not be inducted via the writers' vote. Rose applied a 3rd time in 2015, when Rob Manfred took over from Selig as commissioner of baseball. As you might have guessed, this attempt was also unsuccessful. In December of that year, Manfred stated that allowing Pete Rose back into the game would be a, quote, unacceptable risk. Rose applied again in 2020, in the wake of the Houston Astros sign-stealing scandal. He argued that if those players weren't banned, then he shouldn't be either. This time, Manfred didn't even bother to respond. Maybe he was busy with something. I don't remember 2020 that well. As of 2024, the last time Pete Rose has applied for reinstatement was in 2022. Once again, Manfred rejected him out of hand. The odds that Pete Rose will see the Hall of Fame are slim, at least in his lifetime. Rob Manfred seems unlikely to change his mind on the matter, and he doesn't plan on retiring until 2029, when Rose will be 88 years old. If Pete is still around when a new commissioner comes in, maybe he'll get another shot. We'll just have to wait and see. Speaking of Manfred, you might be surprised to learn that Robbie Boy has actually been responsible for the most lifetime bans handed out by a single commissioner since Kenesaw Mountain Landis himself. Let's break them down, shall we? From 2019 through 2021, Brandon Taubman, Mickey Callaway, and Hall of Famer Roberto Alomar were all added to the list for sexual harassment. Now, considering the content of these respective cases, they aren't exactly fun to talk about in a video like this. I've left articles about each of them in the description, however, if you're inclined to learn more. On a lighter note is the case of Henry Mejia. After being named the Mets closer in 2014, Mejia was suspended for 80 games in 2015 when he tested positive for the drug stanozolol. 3 months later, he tested positive again, earning him a full season suspension. Barely 7 months after that, Mejia would test positive again. Per MLB's drug policy, any player who tests positive 3 times will receive a permanent suspension, which is exactly what happened. This made Henry Mejia the first player ever to be placed on the ineligible list for PED use. Mejia applied for reinstatement in 2018 after the minimum 2 years. And unlike Pete Rose, Mejia actually was allowed back into MLB and signed a minor league deal with the Red Sox in 2019. As of this year, Baseball America has him as a member of the Mexican League, where he has a 1.13 ERA over 8 innings pitched. Pretty good. Also reinstated by Manfred was former Braves GM John Coppolella, who was banned in 2017 for violating international free agent rules. As punishment, the Braves were forced to release 12 international signees, including top prospect at the time, Kevin Maitan. The last of the Manfred Men, as I call them, is one Chris Correa, a former scouting director for the St. Louis Cardinals. I say former because in 2016, Correa was arrested for hacking into the Houston Astros computer system. Using the password of a previous colleague who had since been hired by Houston, Correa logged into the Astros email server. This gave him unauthorized access to a treasure trove of draft rankings, scouting reports, and trade discussions. In June of 2015, Correa ran his first draft for the Cardinals, picking Harrison Bader, Jordan Hicks, and Paul DeYoung. 7 months later, he pleaded guilty for the hack and was sentenced to 46 months in a federal penitentiary. In January 2017, Rob Manfred fined the Cardinals $2 million, ordered them to give 2 draft picks to the Astros, and banned Chris Correa for life. Later that year, Houston won their first World Series, with a little cheating of their own. By my count, there have been 22 people banned by the commissioner's office to have never been reinstated. 16 of them, or nearly 3/4, were banned for gambling-related charges. 3 were banned for sexual harassment, 1 for planning to break his contract, and 1 for computer hacking. Now, those of you who can do math might be thinking, wait, that only adds up to 21. What about the 22nd guy? And that's because I haven't mentioned the 22nd guy yet. So here it is, the dumbest reason, and therefore the best, that anyone has ever been banned from Major League Baseball. Benny Kauf has been called the Deion Sanders of the dead ball era. If that isn't enough to pique your interest, here are some more facts about him. Born in 1890, Benny quit school at the age of 11 to work in the mines. Despite being 5'8", he was incredibly strong. One reporter described him as, quote, a miniature Samson, referencing the legendary biblical figure. 7 years I worked in the dust, Benny told Baseball Magazine, and baseball proved my way of escape. When he joined the New York Highlanders in 1911, though, manager Hal Chase decided that Kauf wasn't ready for the majors yet. So he joined the upstart Federal League in 1914, where he was the best all-around player in the league, according to Sporting Life. They called him a second Ty Cobb. Benny disagreed. He said that he was even better. I'll make them all forget that a guy named Ty Cobb ever pulled on a baseball shoe. Off the field, he wore diamond rings, chewed tobacco, smoked cigars, and drank beer, sometimes all at once. When the Giants first signed him, Benny promised to bunt a home run into that right field stand every day. Despite his boasts, Kauf posted an unimpressive .264 batting average in his first MLB season, and while he did hit 9 home runs and steal 40 bases, Ty Cobb he was not. He was a little better in 1917, when he made headlines with 2 home runs during Game 4 of the World Series. In mid-1918, Benny had his season cut short when he was drafted into World War I. In 1920, Kauf made headlines once again. This time, though, they weren't so positive. See, in fall 1919, Benny had gone into business selling auto parts. That December, he sold a Cadillac to a man from Harlem. As it turned out, the car was not Kauf's to sell. It had been stolen a week earlier from New York's Upper West Side. 2 of his employees, James Whalen and James Shields, no, not that James Shields, would allege that they had been with Benny when the 3 of them decided to steal the car together. Kauf was charged with the theft in February 1920, but still reported for spring training anyway. With all the bad press, however, manager John McGraw traded him that July, not to another MLB team, but to the Toronto Maple Leafs of the International League. McGraw, for his part, believed Benny to be innocent, but Commissioner Landis wasn't so sure. He declared Kauf ineligible until the trial was over. Even after a jury found Kauf not guilty in May 1921, Landis refused to lift the ban. His explanation was that by even being suspected for the theft, Benny Kauf had seriously compromised his character and reputation. According to the commissioner, Kauf was no longer a fit companion for other ballplayers. Benny tried to appeal the ban, taking it to the New York Supreme Court. Unfortunately, since his contract with the Giants had ended, the court said that there was nothing they could do. They did note, however, that, quote, an apparent injustice has been done the plaintiff. Benny Kauf would never be reinstated, and died in 1961 at the age of 71. So, there you have it. Those are all 22 people still banned for life by the Commissioner's Office. I've given you my thoughts on them. Now, I want to know yours. Is there anyone you think shouldn't be on the blacklist? Or, in the other direction, is there anybody who isn't on there who you think should be? Leave a comment with your answer, and I'll catch you next time.